One of the movers looked up at my apartment window and waved. The man standing there waved back. A couple of the guys laughed. I didn't, because I was standing right beside them, and the man in the window had my face. Before I tell you how that happened, you need to understand something. 3 weeks earlier, I discovered a second version of my apartment hidden behind my closet door. My name is Ryan. This happened in the fall of 2023. At the time, I had just moved into a cheap apartment on the edge of a small town in Pennsylvania. The building was old, not haunted-looking old, just neglected. The kind of place where the hallway lights flickered, the carpet smelled damp, and maintenance never showed up unless you called 3 times. The rent was suspiciously low, but I was 24 and broke. I wasn't about to complain. The apartment itself was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, a kitchen, and a narrow storage closet beside the kitchen. At least, that's what it looked like. For the first month, nothing unusual happened. Then I started waking up around 3:14 in the morning. Not every night, just often enough to notice. I'd roll over, check my phone, and see the same time, 3:14 a.m., again and again. I blamed stress, moving, work, life, whatever. Then I noticed something strange about the closet door. Every morning, it was slightly open, not wide open, just enough to leave a thin black crack. I always closed it before bed, every single night. Yet every morning it was open again. At first I assumed I was forgetting. Maybe the latch was loose. Maybe the building settled at night. To test it, I placed a strip of tape across the door before going to sleep. The next morning, the tape was torn. The closet door was closed, not open, closed, like someone had opened it during the night and carefully shut it again afterward. That was the first time I felt genuinely uncomfortable. A few nights later, I set up my phone to record the kitchen. I pointed the camera directly at the closet. The battery was fully charged. I hit record and went to bed. The next morning, I watched the footage. Everything looked normal. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the recording froze. The file ended. No error message. No corruption. Just ended. The battery still had over 80% remaining. I tried again the next night. Same result. 3:14 a.m. Recording stopped. The night after that, same thing. That's when I decided to stay awake. I made coffee, turned on every light in the apartment, and sat at the kitchen table watching the closet door. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, then 3:14. The doorknob moved. I nearly dropped my mug. The handle slowly turned. Nobody was touching it. The door opened, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The closet wasn't there anymore. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's exactly what happened. The tiny storage closet was gone. In its place was a hallway, a long hallway stretching into darkness, far longer than the dimensions of my apartment should have allowed. I stood there staring for almost a minute, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. I wasn't. The hallway remained. Silent, waiting. I grabbed a flashlight. I should have left the apartment. I should have called the police. Instead, I stepped inside. The air became colder immediately. The walls looked familiar. The same paint, the same trim, the same cheap apartment carpeting. After about 30 feet, the hallway opened into a living room. My living room. Exactly my living room. The same couch, the same television, the same coffee table, the same stain in the carpet. Everything was identical. I stared in disbelief. Then I noticed the family photo hanging on the wall. The frame was the same. The background was the same, but every person had vanished. Only empty space remained where faces should have been. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I turned toward the kitchen. A coffee mug sat on the counter. Steam was rising from it. Someone had used it recently. I wasn't alone. I quietly called out. No answer. Then I heard footsteps above me, slow, heavy, crossing the ceiling, which made no sense. My apartment was on the top floor. I started backing toward the hallway. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then I heard another sound, a television, somewhere deeper inside the apartment, playing softly. Voices, too quiet to understand. Then movement. A figure crossing the far end of a hallway, just for a second. Too fast to identify, but definitely human. I ran. I slammed the closet door behind me and spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with every light in the apartment turned on. The next morning, the closet looked completely normal, small, empty, like nothing had happened. I decided to move out immediately. A week later, I hired movers. We spent the afternoon carrying boxes into the truck. Then one of the movers looked up at my apartment window and waved. The man standing there waved back. The movers laughed. I didn't, because I was standing right beside them, and the man in the window had my face. One of the movers smiled. Looks like somebody's avoiding work. Another guy laughed. Yeah, we could use the extra help. The figure continued smiling. Then it waved again. I didn't. I ran into the building, up 5 flights of stairs, unlocked my apartment. Nobody was there. Every room was empty. The closet door stood open. Inside was nothing except darkness. That night I left, for good. I moved into a motel, then into another apartment 2 towns away. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then last week I received a Facebook message from a complete stranger. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a photograph. The image showed the inside of an apartment. A closet door stood open. Beyond it was a hallway, a long hallway, one I recognized immediately. Under the image, the stranger had written a single sentence. I think something came through. I stared at the photo. My blood went cold, because at the far end of the hallway stood a man, watching the camera. The stranger had circled him in red. I recognized the face instantly. It was mine. "3 months ago, I burned a doll. I watched the flames melt its face. I watched the dress turn black. I watched the porcelain crack apart. The next morning, I found a photograph on my kitchen table. In the photograph, I was asleep in my bed. The picture had been taken from inside my bedroom, and standing in the corner of the room was the doll. My name is Jake Turner. I'm 19 years old, and until last year, I worked at a storage warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. If you've ever seen those huge buildings where abandoned property gets sorted before auctions, that's where I worked. Most days were boring. Old furniture, boxes of junk, broken televisions. Nothing interesting. At least, that's what I thought. Until the day apartment 407 arrived. The truck showed up on a rainy Thursday morning. The paperwork said the property belonged to an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway. A welfare check had found her dead in her apartment. Natural causes. No signs of violence. No relatives. Everything she owned was being processed for auction. My coworker, Mike Reynolds, helped unload the truck. At first, it looked normal. Boxes, bookshelves, a rocking chair, several wooden crates. Then we opened the back of the truck and saw the doll. It was standing upright among the furniture, not lying down, not packed away, standing, as if it had been riding there. The thing was nearly 4 feet tall, about the size of a young child. It had long black hair, a white Victorian dress, glass eyes, the kind of eyes that seemed wet, human, almost alive. Mike stared at it. That thing's creepy as hell. I laughed. At least, I tried to. But honestly, I agreed. We carried it inside and placed it near a wall in the far corner of the warehouse. Then we forgot about it. Or at least we tried to. The next morning I arrived before everyone else. I unlocked the building, turned on the lights, and immediately froze. The doll was standing in the middle of the main aisle, 30 feet from where we'd left it. I walked over, examined the floor. Nothing. No tracks. No signs anyone had moved it. When Mike arrived, I accused him of messing with me. He looked genuinely confused. I thought you moved it. We argued for several minutes before dragging it back to the corner. Neither of us thought much about it after that. Not yet. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, the doll appeared near the loading bay, much farther than before. Mike swore he hadn't touched it. I swore the same. Eventually, we decided to check the security cameras. That was our first mistake. The footage showed the doll standing in the corner. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Workers moved around the building. Forklifts drove by. Everything looked normal. Then, at 2:14 a.m., the camera flickered. Just once, less than a second. When the image returned, the doll was standing near the loading bay. There was no movement, no walking, no person carrying it. One frame it was in one place. The next frame it was somewhere else. Mike replayed the footage 6 times. Neither of us said anything. That night, I had my first dream. I was standing inside the warehouse. The lights were off. The building was silent. The doll sat alone at the end of an aisle, looking at me. Then I heard a little girl's voice, soft, sad, right beside my ear.
Don't leave me alone.
I woke up covered in sweat. The next morning, Mike looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, pale skin, shaking hands. Before I could say anything, he asked, "Did you dream about a little girl?" My stomach dropped. What did she say? Mike stared at the floor. She said not to leave her alone. Neither of us laughed. Over the following week, things became worse. The doll kept moving, closer every day, always closer, never farther away. One morning it appeared outside the office. The next morning it was inside the office. The morning after that, it was sitting in my chair. Frank Collins, our warehouse manager, thought we were losing our minds. "It's just old junk." That became his favorite phrase. Every time something happened, every time we complained, every time we showed him footage, "It's just old junk." Then Mike disappeared. One Friday, he never came to work. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty. His truck was still parked outside. His wallet was on the kitchen counter. His keys were hanging by the door. It looked as though he had simply vanished. Police investigated. Nothing. No evidence. No suspects. No body. After Mike disappeared, I started noticing something strange. The doll's dress looked cleaner, newer, as if someone had recently washed it. And its shoes, the little black shoes, they looked polished. I began avoiding the warehouse corner where it usually stood. I stopped looking directly at it. I stopped talking about it. But the dreams continued. Every night, the same little girl, the same sad eyes, the same voice.
Don't leave me alone.
Then one night, she finally said something different.
Under the floor.
That was all. I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. The next day, I started researching Margaret Holloway. At first, I found nothing. Then I found an old newspaper archive, a local article from 1993. Missing child, Emily Carter, age 7. The photo showed a little girl, with long dark hair, a white dress, white shoes. The same girl from my dreams. The article mentioned one other detail. The last person known to have seen Emily alive was Margaret Holloway. Police questioned her, but there was never enough evidence. The case went cold. I kept digging. Several former neighbors described Margaret the same way. A quiet old woman obsessed with dolls. Hundreds of dolls. Every room filled with them. And according to one neighbor, she didn't begin collecting dolls until after Emily disappeared. That night I dreamed of Emily again. This time, she stood in an empty apartment. She pointed toward a section of floorboards. Then she looked directly at me and said,
Please.
I knew exactly where she wanted me to go. The next morning, I drove to apartment 407. The building was scheduled for renovation. Most units were empty. The front door wasn't locked. Inside, the apartment felt wrong, silent, dusty, like nobody had breathed there in years. I found the bedroom. The floorboards were old, except for one section. One section looked newer than the rest. I called the police. Several hours later, investigators removed the boards. Underneath, they found human remains, small remains, a child. Dental records confirmed the identity 2 days later. Emily Carter, missing for nearly 30 years. The story made national news. The family finally received answers. The case was closed, and after that, the doll disappeared. No one saw it leave. No camera recorded it. It simply wasn't there anymore. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The dreams stopped. The voice disappeared. Everything was finally over, or so I thought. 3 weeks later, I came home from work and found something sitting on my kitchen table. A photograph. It showed me asleep in my bedroom, taken from the corner of the room. I lived alone. There should have been nobody there. Then I noticed something in the darkness behind my bed. A silhouette, small, child-sized. The doll, standing perfectly still, watching me sleep. I moved out the next day. A month later, I rented a different apartment, different neighborhood, different city, different locks, different everything. The photographs continued. Every few weeks, another one appeared, always while I slept, always from somewhere inside the room. Sometimes the doll stood near the door, sometimes beside the closet, sometimes right next to the bed. Getting closer. I never showed the police. What could I tell them? That a doll was stalking me? Nobody would believe it. 3 months after the photographs began, I finally snapped. I drove to an abandoned quarry outside the city. I brought the doll with me. I covered it in gasoline, and I set it on fire. I watched until nothing remained. No dress, no hair, no face, nothing. I felt relieved. For exactly one night. The next morning, I woke up and walked into my kitchen. A single photograph sat on the table, waiting for me. The image showed me asleep again, but this time there was no doll in the corner, no shadow, no figure, nothing. At first I felt relieved. Then I noticed the date. The photograph had been taken the previous night. After the doll was burned, I looked closer and noticed something standing outside the bedroom doorway. A little girl, Emily Carter, smiling. That was the first and only time I ever saw her smile. I haven't received another photograph since. No dreams, no voices, nothing. But sometimes, late at night, I hear soft footsteps in my apartment. Tiny footsteps, like a child walking down a hallway. And every now and then, I find something new. A porcelain finger, a lock of black hair, a tiny white shoe, almost like someone is leaving pieces behind. Not because they're trying to get in, but because they never really left. Thank you for listening. check your locks, turn off the lights, and sleep well, if you can.